So now we just carry on with the Dapaanz ethics. And now we look at the non-maleficence, which means to do no harm. The principle often has been highlighted when discussing client exploitation, such as sexual contact or financial exploitation. Both of the examples are active means of doing harm to a client. However, doing harm also can be more subtle, especially given the complex population of a substance user we deal with. An example of a conflict interpretation of this principle is the debate over abstinence versus risk reduction approach to drug treatment. So for people who promote abstinence may claim that a risk reduction approach harms the client by enabling his addiction or her addiction, keep the client from truly hitting the bottom and seeking help. Risk reduction or harm reduction advocates argue that the abstinence-based model harms the client because it doesn't allow for compassion or for meeting the basic needs of an individual who are in the circle of addiction. Advocates for harm reduction may also claim that an abstinence-based model actually prohibits recovery because it does not take into account that recovery is a process rather than a rigid philosophy. This is one ethical dilemma that truly reflects the passion, nature of a personal values and belief. The other example on a micro level is the termination or transfer of clients. For example, in both the HIV or AIDS and the substance treatment field, there is a high degree of staff burnout. Actually, it's a more generous addiction. It's not just in terms treating people with the infectious disease. As an individual clinician becomes increasingly stretched, his or her ability to be flexible with the client and treat them as an individual can be compromised. In some situations, a client who breaks the rule or show up late may suffer the worst of a condition only because the client is a certain client to show up late that day. And this is the last time the clinician is going to deal with the lack of respect. So the clinician can get really frustrated about this. Therefore, the client may be terminated for the counseling section or transferred to another clinician. This could be a fairly common experience. But what does it mean to the client? Will it harm the development of future relationships? What if the client knows of other clients who are late that day, but who are not transferred or terminated for further session? What impression does that give the client about his or her own self-worth? So clinicians must be sure that they are not acting like parents to the client and making the client feel like bad children. If rules regarding transfer or termination are not clear from the start and follow through consistently, then the clinician is violating a principle of non-maleficence. The other example is my personal experience. While working in the setting, we generally will give some grace period, for example, even running group, and by the guideline, we allow the client has a 15 minutes grace period. We just allow them to catch up the group if they've have something missing the bus or have a difficulty with transportation. But if you miss this 15 grace period, you simply just require to report the reception and to put in a cancellation for this group. So this won't affect the continuance of the treatment. And similarly, while the drug court assessment, we generally give the client half-hour grace period to allow them, and in case they show up late or there are some things going on without the plan, and that would be kind of make a client realize and they need to be understood, and also they are place negotiate if the unexpected event happened. But we do put the limits. So you want to go be too far because we have other schedule maybe for next client. So that's a half hour we are allowed it. The other one is about promotion of autonomies. People with substance use can be affected by numerous neuropsychiatric, metabolic, nutritional, and psychological concerns. And this can affect their judgment. So in general, substance user can experience poor judgment due to either to active substance use or to the result of long-term use. In case of incompetence, it's not fair to the client to allow the full autonomy in decision making, as the client could unwittingly harm himself. So this kind of makes the argument in terms how we're going to draw the line in terms allow the client to make a decision for themselves, or we don't think it's an idea to follow the decision they made. So it's not always clear whether the person is truly incompetent, and the process of proving incompetence can be burdensome and time-consuming. But the basic guideline, we need to respect the self-determination of our clients who have a decision-making capacity. When we talk about the respect, it's about covered intention. We do have the intention to allow them to make a decision, and also reflect on our understanding. We understand how much they can make a decision, how competent they can make a decision. And the last would be absence of a controlling influence that determine their action, which means we allow the information to be fully disclosed to the client so they can make fully consent decisions. So competence issues are rarely clear-cut. There are several factors that can temporarily make a client seem incompetent. A client may seem unable to make independent decisions one day, and then the next day be quite different. It's very competent. So in reviewing a client's ability to maintain autonomy, consider not only the initial impression, but the duration and the severity of the behavior, as well as reported by other person in the client's life. So in a situation you can't consult other person in the client's life, it's a very good way to check clinical record and check with the previous case manager of this client. So consultation with other medical or psychiatric professionals and reports by the client support systems and a strong baseline assessment can help clarify the presence of a mental state's changes. The following moral rules or obligations are deriving from the application of the principle of a respect of autonomy. So first, tell the truth. Whether the individual has the necessary information to make a sound decision. So, for example, when the time I do the drug court assessment, I will make it very clear to explain what's about the court program, what requirement for the eligibility, and at the same time I will tell how the information will be stored and shared and used, and what a possible outcome from my assessment. And second, respect the privacy of others. So you will give people full rights in terms of how much information they would like to disclose and how they want to make the decision making, and the process they take, the time they need to take. Third, protect confidential information. And the last one is obtain consent for intervention with the patient. So those will help you to follow the rules, follow the ethic guidelines, and to promote autonomy. And confidentiality and privacy. Unfortunately, the nature of a managed care requires more extensive justification for treatment, and the number of individuals that need information about the person's treatment is increasing. So a lot of times we share information across the board. For example, when I access the DHB record, I can also access the people, and in terms they are purchase or prescription in the community pharmacies. So information be shared. Then this will be leading to the question how we treat people's information with respect. We highly value confidentiality and privacy. So it is ethical responsibility of the treatment provider to be honest with the client about what data needed to be reported to the funding source, such as if they need to go to the social work income, insurance, or what information needs to be shared with other agency or individual. It is the responsibility of the treatment provider to obtain the consent for any information shared outside of a client-provider relationships. So for example, if I do the drug court assessment, I will let the client know the information will be shared with the lawyer, legal counsel, and the judge, and the possible next treatment provider. So clients need to be aware of the information who will have a right to be shared. A provider or clinician must ensure that clients understanding the agreement they are entering into by accepting treatment from the agency or providers. And clients should have all the information they need to make a decision about the service be provided, including to what specific amount and the type of disclosure they are willing to consent. However, this doesn't mean that treatment provider has no control over what is disclosed to others about the clients. It is imperative that provider use discretion in conversation with individual outside of a therapeutic relationship, and only report what is relevant to the situation. And the provider should only document what's essential. For example, if a client comes to treatment for their substance use, and the provider should document the client's substance abuse history, motivation for entering the treatment, any medical or emotional issues that relate to treatment, and a plan for service. But there is a significant difference between an entry that states client is upset regarding recent divorce and an entry that reads client claim his ongoing sexual relationship has caused his wife to leave him. So it's about how much detail you can actually disclose in the documentation. Has anything relevant treatment or irrelevant treatment has been disclosed in the document? So the later one may be of interest, but perhaps even relevant to the treatment. So it should not be documented until it has become necessary treatment information. And boundaries. We are vulnerable to unprofessional behaviors when we work in people who have substance use. A lot of clinicians are facing a number of challenges and special issues when working with people who suffered abuse or neglect as children. Like most people, counselors can become upset or angry when they hear about the children getting hurt or be abused. Some counselors are recovering from substance use disorder and were themselves abused or neglect as children. They may find themselves in a professional situation where they have to confront their own abuse experience and expect on their lives. So that is about to draw the emotional boundary line here. As a consequence, counselors who abuse or who had experienced substance and parents may experience feelings that are interfering with their effort to working effectively with their client. For example, clinicians may find it difficult to relate to clients effectively and to reach a balance of providing enough, but not too much support at a distance. Survival of abuse may pose many relational challenges to the clinician. These clients are often mistrustful at the same time that they need a trustworthy relationship. So it's kind of called push-pull dynamic may result as this situation. Clinicians may find themselves overly fascinated by and invested in a client abuse history, sometimes to the exclusion of other life and therapy issues. So they kind of too much engage in the abusive histories and neglect other kinds of treatment issues. Or they can be opposite. They may want to avoid the discussion of the abuse for personal reasons. Counselors must be mindful of this possible reaction and develop appropriate strategy to ensure effective care of the client. Because child abuse and neglect reflect ultimate violation of trust. It is critical that counselors maintain the professional relationship with the appropriate boundaries and the limitation in place. And the counselor must be trustworthy and provide a safe relational contact that, in contrast to the client's past experience, presents unique opportunity for hearing. So that's kind of require how you make a balance between engage with the patient's treatment needs and at the same time draw the boundary, keep the safety between yourself and the client. So that's why it's very important to understand where you see your client. The setting can be misinterpreted and sometimes can be a bit difficult to defend it yourself. And also there are issues around when your funnel and the people you know become your client, how you avoid this conflict interest and draw the boundaries. and also in terms provide needs, help, and sometimes in terms in the favor as exchange, and that also can be damaging in terms of how you draw the boundary and with your client. So it's very good to draw the clear guideline in terms of therapeutic contract and what you can do, what you shouldn't do, and make it very clear to yourself and to the client. So each party aware of their responsibility and the rights in terms of getting into the therapeutic relationship here. And transference here, and generally refer to the feeling and issues from the past that client transfer or project onto the counselor in a current relationship. When the clients interact with other persons, they are likely to respond in a way that repeat all the patterns from their past. Actually, this can also reflect in the general public, not just the client. So the client brings the everyday response and distortion of life into relationship with the counselor or clinician, who as a professional can recognize this problem that are interfering with the client's daily function. And this transferency reaction have specific implication for survivors of childhood abuse, who may perceive clinician or counselor as a threatened or abandoned in the same way as the perpetrators of the abuse. Conversely, clients may idealize the counselors, see the counselor as the warm and the loving parents they always wanted. So that's why we thought boundary can be difficult to manage, and sometimes even the cross the boundary can be very subtle and without you conscious aware of. So clients' feeling about themselves may also affect the relationship. Many survivors have enormous shame and low self-esteem and feel responsible and gut-ridden about abuse. And this may lead to attempt to distract counselor or clinician from abuse-related issues so that they are not discussed or examined. And they probably can respond to the clinician in a way that replicates the past. So you must be aware of and prepare for possible response of this sort, and working to bring them to the client's attention for discussion. And also clinician must avoid replicate rational pattern from the past, even if clients expect them and act in a way to encourage them. So for example, the clinician should not allow the client to be overly caretaking towards themselves, and nor should be allow the client to over-involved. As a result, objectivity is lost. So that would be encourage you when you're doing any sections, you have to be very clearly what topic will be addressed in these particular sections. So establish a treatment frame and the specific issues. At the same time, you'll be very clear in terms of range of reaction and response. And from your client, sometimes it can be based on your own background and personal issues. So that's what we call the counter-transference occurs in a therapy settings. That means when you have your own unresolved feelings of issues, that may be disturb you working with your client and effectively. So that just kind of emphasize we have mentioned and before this around this topic. And ethics, it's this kind of a help you understand what the behavior expectation for practitioners or we call clinicians, and also understand the rights of our clients. And it's really good protection our own practice and make sure we are safe, we are secure in our role, and the protection for clients, and to minimize the risk for the mistreatment and abuse to the client. And there are some key updates to the Code of Ethics and developed by Dapaanz. A key change will be underpinned by the Tigana Maori, and also the language has been updated. It is aimed to be relevant to all Dapaanz members and reflect the diversity in the workforce, including the growing peer workforce.